Okay, welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Scholar Gypsies. I'm delighted to have Thomas Sheridan with me for a conversation today, and I suppose the theme of our conversation will be on a thought exploration around Irish mythology and its possible use as a tool for kind of spiritual and even political revolution. But before we get into all that, a linked topic is the Tuatha Dé Danann festival that we are running on September 28th, Saturday, September 28th in Ballybritish in County Laois. The link to book tickets to that event and the full lineups and schedule of the day and evening's fair will be available on the ticketing site, Eventbrite. I'm delighted to say that Thomas is going to be joining us on the day along with John Waters, Louise Rosengrave, um, Dr. Anne McCluskey, the barrister Una McGurk. We're going to have Father Sean Sheehy, Stephen Sutton, who many will know from his Substack work and musician, uh, and also Cueva Hoggerty and the Tradicals, and a number of musical acts on the day. So um, anyone that hasn't booked a ticket yet can do so in the pinned comment or the link description below. Now, that's the blurb over. Welcome, Thomas. Giagwitch, how art thou?
Gurmeet Monacood. Gerry, I'm fine. Everything's good. Can't complain.
Good stuff. I suppose just what I kind of my own feeling on the days, months, and years ahead is that um, we an alteration is required in terms of how well, personally speaking, approach the future. And that would be, for me anyway, in contrast to how maybe I would have approached it over the last 4 years. And just on that topic, I suppose our thought process is the idea of utilizing, our culture, our land, our language our music, but in a more kind of real sense in the battles we may be fighting in the times ahead. And one of maybe the lesser spoken about topics would be Irish mythology, and bar a few people like yourself who are, expert in the area. I wonder to myself, are these tools that we can use on the road ahead?
Well, absolutely they are, but it's like anything else. They have to be, framed within a contemporary concept. We can't be still living like it's the 1930s and stuff like that. Now, it has worked before. The Gaelic League and its formation that took place in the late Victorian era at a time when basically being Irish was vanishing. Irish towns and cities were seas of Union Jacks and Union flags and the St. Patrick crosses, and you would have people all over the country coming out for royal visits. Basically, by the time the 1880s came around, Irishness was dead. A lot of it had to do with the fact that most of us now living in America as sort of like, or England, or as a result of the famine, where they were moving more towards a sort of a Catholic diaspora more so than an Irish diaspora, which is basically what the churches wanted. And the Gaelic League, composed mostly of Protestants, and many of them of Anglo-Irish descent, basically saved Irish culture, the Irish language, and everything else. I believe in 1880 there was something like 6 books a year published in the Irish language. By the 1980s, there was something like 6,000 a year being published. Now, that's a remarkable turnaround. Remember, people don't seem to understand. We talked today about the language being dead, but it had no presence in the culture back then. It was literally considered a form of slang. Yes, a larger percentage of the population on the Western Seaboard and other places spoke it in the 1880s, but it had no strategic power within the society itself. Now, the Gaelic League basically were concerned that Irishness was vanishing. This kind of events were going on all over Europe. You had the von der Vogel movement in Germany and so on that felt like Germans were being detached from their culture because of the increase in industrialization and also the growth of Prussian imperialism through the German the Germanic Empire, that was being lost as well. And you had similar movements surrounding poetry and stuff like that in Britain and other cultures. Even in America, you had like, Walden by Thoreau and stuff, people, authors like that, extolling the loss of kind of the American innocence. So in Ireland, it was mightily successful because eventually it drew in people like Patrick Pearse. Now, Patrick Pearse being wise enough to see that there was a sort of a software delivery in this that could be used for political aims. So he was a very clever man at drawing comparisons between the emerging struggles towards Ireland in the post-Home Rule era and the mythology of the past, particularly things like the Book of Invasions and so on, and the infusing of archetypes such as Cúchulainn into youth who are interested in joining, at the time, nationalists, but they were more sort of cultural nationalist concepts. And this also eventually made its way very deeply into the IRB. In fact, for good or for bad, the IRB took over the Gaelic League and politicized it. But they were also realized that this was something really powerful. And so what began with Douglas Hyde in that period ended with British troops leaving Dublin in 1921. So the power of this is remarkable. But the thing is, you have to frame it in a contemporary way. And Pearse was almost like an Irish Renaissance man in that sense, in that he knew that the youth of Ireland at that time, they really had nothing to associate with outside the church. There was emerging things like the GAA and stuff like that. And there was also other sports, and there was things like boys' brigades and scouting and all this kind of stuff. But he knew there was a hunger for a uniquely Irish version of that. So within his own school, I think it was in Rathfarnham, and he cultivated the idea that, he was so far ahead of his time. And I'm ashamed to say when I was growing up, I thought he was a bit of a weirdo, but that's because it was being done by the propaganda in the state. But he was very much of the Joseph Campbell mindset of the hero's journey. And he infused within young men and women, very important, and women too, that they could be a Queen Maeve, they could be a Setanta Cúchulainn, they could be these archetypes inside them while they existed in a modern world. And that's the power of this mythology, because it exists and is communicative to a place below the linguistic mind and in the world of symbols and concept. It has a powerful propensity to rewire literally the human being in a way that you want to rewire them. Now, that's been done to us for centuries, for over a century now, with advertising and things like Bernays processes and so on. But the stuff really does work, and we have to learn to use it too. Literally, after a while, your brain rewires. You have a thing called epigenetics, which is genetic changes in the brain that happen as a result of not of evolutionary or environmental factors, but because of literally your thoughts. So you start to think differently, your brain becomes different. This is why those of us on this side literally cannot communicate to what you call normies, and they cannot communicate with us because we've literally decoupled, moved off, and rewired our brains in a different way. And mythology is central to that because it decouples you from the pathological life support system, which the control grid feeds you and holds you with.
Yeah. No, I go along with, especially the last bit there, the kind of the rewiring. Would you see that there? I certainly, if we take the Tuatha Dé Danann as an example, that it would be kind of, pre-Christian, pre-history. It has a certain, seems to me, spirituality encased in the tradition, and that there's wisdom locked into those myths and legends and spirit, very deeply connected with the land of Eire or Ireland, or whatever you want to frame it in modern terms, and that it's important to keep those threads, that spider web from prehistory to today, alive and unbroken? Would you see a spiritual element to it as well?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And it's a kind of an interesting fusion of culture and spirituality. I mean, just outside the Tuatha Dé Danann thing, let's talk about this concept as a whole. The most spiritual experience that human beings on this planet have had, and particularly Europeans, in the last 20 years was Peter Jackson's version of The Lord of the Rings. Now, these are Hollywood movies. These are Hollywood actors. They're made by directors. They have special effects. But those three films, that trilogy, has a profound effect on people who've watched it, particularly people of European descent, which is exactly what Tolkien wrote this for, a sort of a remembering, a kind of an unlocking of ancient codes trapped within, or maybe our DNA, whatever, this kind of thing. But it had a deeply profound spiritual effect upon people. And yet in Ireland, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You have to remember that we, just about like all European pre-Christian traditions, were an oral tradition. Nothing would have been written down. It would have been passed on, similar to the Vedas in India and places like that. Now, the Christians were the ones who wrote it down, particularly the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages wrote a lot of it down. But there's also those 900 books at the Royal Irish Academy are hiding from us, which is another thing. There's a whole kettle of worms there of censorship. That, like, why are they hiding 900 books that belong to that tell us about the ancient history of Ireland from us, and claiming things like, well, they're too expensive to translate and all this kind of thing, when these organizations are handing out grants left, right, and center to all kinds of people and individuals. On top of that, with the church, they Christianized some of it, but they didn't only do this in Ireland. They also did this in Norway and with the Eddas and stuff like that, the Viking sagas. So, but not too much though, because they also knew the power of this. The Catholic Church were brilliant at taking existing archetypes that exist in the pagan world and Christianizing them. Well, Catholic, really Vaticanizing them, and making them work. So you have to watch. You have to be careful now and watch these with a pinch of salt, taking them as they're written literally. This is why when I wrote the book about 6 or 7, well, more than that, probably 8 years ago now, the Druid Code, I just deliberately compiled comparative mythology in order to find the basic archetype pinpoints, commonalities between various European and Indo-European mythology, and say, then you can kind of understand that when you look at something like the Tuatha Dé Danann, it's a very deep story because it speaks to us on two levels of consciousness, okay? And that's why there's two battles of Moytura. One took place in the real world, and one took place in the mythical world, the subconscious world. That's why there's two of them. And it's just like, it's really a story of the Irish people in their old pre-Christian state coming to terms with changes as the greater world impacted upon them. And this would go back to the pagan Romans as well. Remember the stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann being approached by the fomorians at Uisneach, and these were representatives from overseas who were tax collectors. Now, who were overseas tax collectors in the late Iron Age? The Romans, the Romans from Britain. And we know now that there was a vastly more complex relationship between Rome and Ireland in those times, just by the archaeological stuff alone, let alone all the other things. Now, the numbers of Roman coins that have been found here and so on. So what it tells us is that we have a unique culture on this island, very much so, and it is in danger of being corrupted like a software virus. And right back to our ancient ancestors, this is what the Book of Invasions is all about. And they knew this, okay? Now, the final end of the Tuatha Dé Danann was the invasion by the Milesian Gaels, and you have the Druid American at Tara issuing what was called a satire of the wind. It was like a proclamation to banish them into the underworld. Now, there's all kinds of ways of looking at this, right? This could be a metaphor for propaganda, a metaphor for different culture imposing itself on the old culture. But this is what the Tuatha Dé Danann, and this is why this comes speaks to us through the ages. You know, people say they came from their destroyed cities across the sea in a storm cloud, whatever. There's various interpretations of it, but that's the general story. Now, this is a common story all across the northern part of Europe, of a kingly race who comes from the sea. Now, you can tie the Atlantean thing and all into that, but you can also tie in a loss of culture, a collapse. And we know that about 5,000 years ago, the population of Europe just vanished. It just vanished. It was probably a plague or something like that. And the ones who survived brought back all the old previous things like agriculture. Well, the emerging things that they were working on then, the early forms of agriculture. And what it would have been similar to, what's that, Rudolf Steiner method of agriculture where you grow in the wild and stuff, you harvest wild things. But permaculture. And so this kind of thing. So the Tuatha Dé Danann story is a story of psychic and tribal survival. The people of the goddess Danu, okay? Now, ever since those Christian days, there has been attempts to murder this mythology in all kinds of ways, either through ignoring it or kind of like making out that it was kind of like not sinful, to the appalling British Israelism movement, which, funny enough, was running in tandem more or less with the Gaelic League. Well, the Gaelic League was trying to establish, you know, a genuine mythological aspect to our people. You had the likes of the Gaelic League going around saying, "Oh, the Irish are really the Jews, and the tribe of Daniel is the Tuatha Dé Danann," because they didn't understand. They didn't even understand it was Irish. They didn't even know what Irish was, and all this other nonsense. You know, Scotia's grave, and she was like, all this crap. You know, that was all pushed by the British Israelites. It's always like, you don't belong here. You Paddies are somehow a replacement for something else is better than you. In this case, the British Israelites. The whole concept was the people that lived on the church were basically Jews. We're Jewish people, basically. And it's absolute insulting nonsense. I'm not putting down Jewish people. I'm talking about how these people think, the self-hatred within them. And we still see that to this day. You know, and this has been one of the most dangerous legacies of, I'm not going to go on an anti-Christian rant, but it's one of those globalization things that makes you look away rather than within. And the entire history, you look at the Book of Invasions, the entire canon is to protect this land from invaders. And this concept of the Tuatha Dé Danann going under the ground and becoming a she is just like a kind of a way of saying, we've reverted, we've gone under. We're under the ground. We're almost like we're waiting like a software, like an epigenetic software, to be released again under the right circumstances. They said when Ireland is under its greatest danger, it didn't show up during the famine. It didn't show up during the Confederacy Wars, where 1/3 of the population of this country died, were killed, or starved. And it didn't show up during lots of bad times when we need them. And I have a theory behind that. It's because we're Christians. Because the country is Christian, it's not allowing these archetypes to come to the surface. We're now reaching a point where because of things like church scandals and so on, where even a lot of people on our side, some of them are, but I don't care what your religion is or anything, but it's an inhibitor to allowing this stuff coming to the surface, you know. And I don't know the answer to that, but Patrick Pearse kind of did know the answer, because he was perfectly happy with being a Catholic, a practicing Catholic, because look, at the end of the day, Catholicism is basically paganism anyway, with Jesus at it. And he found the way to fuse that up through it. Now, we need to do that again. We need to find a way. Now, the inhibitor today is globalization, right? This is really what Ireland's problem is, okay? These are the fomorians, right? Now, but the problem is the fomorians, in what I call the new fomorians, or the fomorian Nua, Nua, if you want to call them that, right? They are the NGOs, they are the endless propaganda, they are RTA, they are the corrupting, and I'm going to call it out what it is. It's black magic by its definition, by the definition of black magic. That's what they're up to. They're changing people's consciousness and thinking against their will. That's the definition of black magic without their permission. And they do it constantly, and they're doing it endlessly. And some of us have broken that spell, but even on our side, lots haven't. Sadly, they're still wired into this fomorian matrix that, you know, the likes of RTE and the government push.
Well, that ties into a kind of resonance with me at the moment in terms of the method of, you know, the political arguments that many on our side, and myself included at times, get tricked or drawn into, you know, nonsense like the bike shed and nonsense like, you know, a raft of politicians coming out to, you know, talk about Oasis concert tickets and putting on more concerts, as almost as if it's the Roman times, and give the people more games to distract them from. And that energy assigned to those types of, you know, surface level political argument is wasted energy for, you know, any of us, you know, any of us trying to make our way forward in the world, but also not to get, you know, distracted away from the things that are to reconnect into the things you're talking about there.
I'm glad you brought the Romans up, because there's a lot to learn from that experience with the gladiatorial games. When those stadiums were those arenas and colosseums were originally built, they were only supposed to stage like 2 or 3 games a year on, you know, Roman festivals, on religious feast days. And towards the end of the Western Empire, they were non-stop. They were literally every day of the week. Now, a lot of this distraction came from the fact that the Roman establishment had become completely insane, completely bonkers within Rome itself. You had like these legacies of long-term political families. The Praetorian Guard wasn't doing its job properly, and, you know, basically killing the emperors when they got out of control. There was tremendous control. There was a disintegration of the empire at the fringes, and ultimately this led to the creation of the Eastern Empire, which went on to exist for another, you know, 1400 years. Quite incredible, the length of the 4,000-year span of Rome. And the Eastern Empire was kind of like our side within Rome at the time. They said, like, look, the establishment has gone bonkers, absolutely gone bonkers. And they moved the whole thing to Constantinople. And that began the whole kind of Byzantine culture and so on, which still exists to this day, basically, as Greek Orthodox and things like that. But this is what happened. Their leadership went. They even had emperors like Marcus Aurelius, not the famous one, the philosopher, but a later one, who wanted to be a transgender and was using the state's treasury to pay doctors to turn him into a woman. This is, you know, some Rome echoes the decline of the Western Empire in particular, and echoes where we are in the West right now. And the deterioration always happens on the fringes. Ireland is on the fringe of the European Union. It's on the fringe of the Western alliances. So the deterioration is much more apparent when you see just how psychotic our political class is. And I have no problem calling that. They're psychotic. The reason why they go on about Oasis tickets is because they're not in control of this country. That's literally the only control they have. They can't really oversee budgets, inflation, banking, anything that runs that's what keeps the welfare of this country going is controlled directly by foreign or operations, you know, transnationals, EU, so on, right? And increasingly NATO. So all they can really do is pontificate about not enough hotel rooms for Oasis. And we have an increasingly uneducated, and I mean that in an enlightenment sense rather than an actual degree or certificate sense, population who are bewildered all the time and think this stuff is important. Now, regarding our side, there's still too many people wired into this fomorian matrix. I could not believe the reaction So many people I thought had sense going bonkers over that stupid bike shed thing, as if we had so many other issues going on. And the reason is they're still wired in. They're still watching RTE News. They're still reading the Irish Times. They're still listening to, and I know in many cases they can't help it, the people at work. The answer to that is that the only reason I know about it, and I'm sure it's the only reason you know about it, is it comes up in your social media feed. So one day I switch on Facebook and all I see are people going on about a stupid bike shed, that costs 300 grand. And when you actually look at it, that's probably what it should have cost, because it's a listed building and only had the historic planning commission and everything would have been involved in that. That's how much it would have cost. Okay. End off. Okay. Go away, find something important. But it went on for days, and it's still going on. I saw 2 posts this morning about it. It's still going on. Now that's a disease of the mind. They have to learn how to break.
Yeah, and we've and you could tie I tied the Ryan Tuberty scandal into something like that, and further back the Golfgate. It was like a tiny controlled explosions that hope to distract the people enough away from the fact of that point you made, that the people in control are not in control of what's going on in this land, in this country. I just want to tie back to something there, because it's a very interesting point you brought up about Pádraig Pearse. And would I be correct in just summarizing? Basically, he managed he managed to fuse his Catholicism and Irish mythology in a spiritual sense, but also in a political sense. And as a result, the power of that was a huge danger. So when we think back to the 1916 era and the fact that all those leaders were executed, and we go back to, we'll say 5 years later, when we did, we'll say, get some type of independence, as we look back on it now, that those leaders were in fact put into place to run the country, that there was some sort of a danger with Pearse's that 1916 patriot class that, we'll say, the UK were afraid of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If we would have been the United States, or Thomas Jefferson's, Benjamin Franklin's, George Washington's, Samuel Adams would have all been shot, and we'd been left with people that were inferior. And that's the great tragedy of the Irish independence movement, is that our greatest minds, whether they were Patrick Pearse, whether they were Plunkett, whether they did O'Reilly, all these other people, these people that we badly needed to build a nation, and Michael Collins, they perished. And I have very grave doubts about the sincerity of Eamon de Valera. I don't even know who he is or what he is, or there's so many outstanding questions there. Particularly, he seems to have cost us the 1916 uprising, when he didn't issue the order to attack the pinned down British troops on Mount Street that were being massacred by a small detachment out of some Georgian houses. And they were there for the taking, and the revolution was there for the winning, or at least it would have been a massive victory that would have expired, the whole British army being captured. He had the ability to capture thousands of British troops in Dunleary, and he didn't do it. They were there for the taking. And then he's the one who survives, and then he's the one who allowed, it doesn't make any sense to me how he was so easily allowed to get the Republic. That was a remarkable thing, and leave the Dominion. It happens too smoothly and too easily. And there's other questions there about his treatment of the other side following the Civil War, when you still had concentration camps and things like this. So I don't know about him, but he was the perfect man for what the British wanted in this country. They certainly didn't want a Patrick Pearse. They absolutely didn't want a Michael Collins. And they, even though he was available, he was capable of compromise of the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Every single document he said, this is a spoof. We're going to attack. We're going to continue the war in the background. So this kind of thing. Pearse wouldn't have been like that. He would have been able. The British officers who executed him and found them guilty in a military court, didn't want to do it because they said that in their own memoirs that we shot the finest man we ever met, and this is from the British officers who sentenced him to death. So there you, and in the end, we get Eamon de Valera handing us over to the church and your fair maidens dancing at the crossroads. And this is another thing. No one ever talks about this, but de Valera deliberately deindustrialized this country to the point where the North was the actual industrial power, still under British rule, still producing revenue for the British Crown. While it wasn't until de Valera was out of office in the 1960s that we had a rapid industrialization program under Jean Lamasse. And instantaneously, we went from being the poorest nation in Western Europe and started moving up rapidly to the point where we had very good standard of living by, I know we had problems and everything, but comparative to what we had under his, agricultural concept, which was very similar. It was very similar to like the Soviet type things without collectivization. So it didn't even achieve, the numbers of produce that was available. In fact, when we industrialized, our actual agricultural efficiency as a nation shot through the roof. So it was like he was put in there to hold us back. Absolutely, I've no doubt about that. Not a no doubt about that, but I would say I'm highly suspicious that was his purpose. He was like he was the deadbeat dad that the British wanted in power here.
Just to take it back, like I'm just thinking there of to take it back to the kind of the mythological, and I have this is just a thought bubble, and I want to get your take on this. Is if we were to go back 3,000 or 4,000 years or 5,000 years or whatever, I have this sense that we'd be quite shocked at how internally spiritually advanced people were. Like when we think back on history, we think of how much progress has been made in the external world up to now, and what I wonder is were we as a people a lot more internally in tune with the divine or the spiritual world back then, in your opinion?
Yeah, okay, here comes the controversial part. Look, we were raised in school told that, like, you hear this thing Judeo-Christian, the West is a Judeo-Christian concept. The Christianity civilized the West. Nothing could be further from the truth. By the time Christianity started to make inroads, pagan Europe had given us everything from philosophy to science. We had central heating. We had computers. They were run by clockwork, but they're computers. We had steam engines. We had functioning. There were cities in Europe built by the Romans and the Greeks that had incredible sewage and sanitation systems, water systems, everything. And these people did this and were highly scientific, highly, philosophical, but also deeply religious. Plato, we're raised in school to believe the likes of Plato was an honorary Christian, or Archimedes and Pythagoras. These people were pagans, as was Hypatia. It was Christians who burned the Library of Alexandria down to the ground. Now, and skinned alive Hypatia. So, this whole thing that Europe is Judeo-Christian couldn't be further from the truth. It's just another part of these brainwashing things. European civilization was developed by pagans. These people were deeply spiritual. They have been dehumanized in centuries since. They'll say things like, well, they had these horrible games at the Colosseums. Well, Christians had holy wars. Muslims had, jihad and all this, all this other stuff. It went on the other side too. Witch burnings and, horrific persecutions of other factions were in their own religion. So don't give me this like moral ground, because that's human beings in general. But when you have a balance between pragmatism and a spiritual grounding, and I would say that includes modern Christianity. I would say that too. I wouldn't have any problem with that. Once you don't dominate one with the other, you will find, I mean, that's what Freemasonry is, basically. It's trying to balance between a spiritual, esoteric identity and a scientific identity. And that'll be expressed in people like, Isaac Newton beautifully, or people like the Enlightenment movement, which, like the Renaissance, was also a resurgence of the pagan world. Whenever that's been attempted, we've grown. Whenever the old pagan world has been, whether it's the Gaelic League in Ireland, whether it's the Enlightenment, whether it's the Renaissance, there's been tremendous advances in human Western society. It's there for us. Now, the thing is that it can't be dogmatic, in the sense that, like, I would rather Ireland be completely secular than pagan. I don't want a pagan constitution. I want a secular constitution that allows religious freedom. That's what I want, and also laws that says that one religion can't impose itself on another, this kind of thing. And we can write in other things, like to deal with religious fanaticism as it comes along. But ultimately, I'd rather have a secular society than a pagan society, because I don't believe in forcing my beliefs on anyone. Now, the beauty of this is again, someone like back to Padraig Pearse. He said that he's made a statement once that he said, if some friendly Christian brothers had not gotten to me before Lady Gregory, I'd probably be a pagan now. He actually said that in one of his writings. So he had a great understanding, of not just Irish paganism, but also the classical world and paganism and stuff like that. He understood that kind of Arcadian, that he saw Ireland as an Arcadia, as a kind of a land of great beauty, but also of great ability. That yes, we could have this Celtic twilight dream state. This is one of the things, like, the detractors in those days didn't fully understand. He didn't want us all on the side of the hill singing sonnets to the goddess Eru, or going on religious festivals to holy wells or Corpus Christi parades. He wanted that in tandem with the development of industry, the development of science, because he knew the classical world's greatest gift to the world was its ability to fuse practicality with the spiritual. The Romans and the Greeks had a spiritual thing for everything. I remember years ago, I did a module on Freudian psychology and also European philosophy. And the first thing it said on the thesis paper was, Greece and Rome were held back. Ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, and ancient Greece were deeply religious societies, but they didn't achieve anything technically. I mean, they only built pyramids. They only invented just about everything we have today. And you could actually see how that's been written in there too. That we're not allowed to honor the paganisms, that pagan past that brought us to where we are. But like the whole thing of the mythology in this country, there's a resurgent element in there. You can have both. Now, spirituality is not religion. I think most people who are outside, other than religious fanatics, know this, okay? Now, so literally anything can be made as a spiritual influence. So therefore, you could look at something like the Jesus Christ story, and you could say, well, look at that triumph. Look, ultimately that was a triumph, okay? So you're on this kind of like Campbell-esque hero's journey, so you could have that kind of thing. You could have the story, like some of the Christian saints, even I find remarkable. I'll give you a great one. Joan of Arc. How did a 17-year-old French rural girl defeat the English army at the Battle of Orleans, and rallied the French to have some of their greatest military victories? She did so because she came from a very rural part of France that was not only steeped in her own Catholic faith, but also deep within the old legends and folklore and stories of her people. Not many, but several scholars have suggested that she was still a pagan, but she was a Catholic, but pagan enough to know that using herself as an archetype, she became the mother goddess of France in the eyes of the French troops. she became an archetype. She became this powerful archetype. Now, some who were Catholics would have seen her as a Virgin Mary type archetype or a saint, but it went deeper than that. She knew how to tap into people, and this shows the power of stepping into in the hero's journey. It's there for males and for females, and
it's been adopted in. You can see it like like the heroes. If you take a John Bunyan's book, The Pilgrim's Progress, one of the early, like I think it was at the time of its publication the second most the second most published book in the world, which is essentially the hero's journey of Christian, trying to find his way through heaven through a series of trials, and this inner exploration really is like, I suppose if we were to look at it's very interesting to me. One thing, going back to earlier in our conversation when you brought up Lord of the Rings, is I read that book as a first year student, even though it wasn't on the curriculum of what I was doing. And I found so many people over the last 4 years have read it, never mind watched the movie. And when you kind of think of the spiritual journey, it is that inner hero's journey or heroine's journey for people in a kind of a nutshell.
It is nothing else. It's nothing else but that. That's what it is. Christians will always use the expression, we all have our own cross to carry. That's an example of it. It exists in everything. You have, like in Ireland, even in the early tradition, you have like St. Patrick's purgatory, descent into purgatory. You have the things, Milton's Paradise Lost. These are directly going back to things like Orpheus and stories of that ilk, like the labyrinth and the Minotaur, slaying the labyrinth and the Minotaur and the labyrinth, the going into the self, where religion says to you, you can't follow that. You must follow this predetermined set of dogmatic rules, and that's all there is to it. Now, a lot of Christians do ignore that, and they don't go to, like I always say, if you're going to be a Catholic, try to be a folk Catholic, where you stay away from the Holy See's influence, and you just go about that in yourself, your own rituals and your own direct connection to the higher things, into your spiritual state, like a monk would do or something. But yes, it's absolutely that. I mean, just look during the lockdowns. I was totally inspired by the concept of the hero's journey, by the concept of ancient mythology, that this is like a task that we're being set upon us. This is a challenge, the call to adventure. My God, that's it. When we want when we have to change this, we have to develop this cultural insurgency in Ireland that will bring us to the mentality that Greeks and Poles, Greeks, yeah, but say Poles and Magyar Hungarians have, where they say, hell of it, this is our country, this is our land, we're Poles, we're Hungarians. Don't you dare tell us that we have to share it with you. We have been programmed to be out of that. The way back into that is to go on this adventure, this call to adventure. And that begins, and just like all those kinds of epic stories, they come with heroes, heroines, help, wizards, dragons, and they're all metaphorical things, so deception. So you think of the bullshit about like bike sheds and Oasis tickets. That would be a dark wizard who spellbound you. The kind of thing has put you off the track of where you say, when in reality, you're saying, look, I'm going to learn how to speak Irish, right? I'm going to walk every inch of the Burren. I'm going to get in contact with this land. I'm going to do my family tree and see where we came from, this kind of thing. And what I'm going to find out why I am as messed up as I am, but also as what brought me to this point where I want to change. But if you're doing that and then suddenly, oh Jesus, 300,000 for a bleeding, bullshit. And you're suddenly off the hero's journey, and you're back into the fomorian matrix. So there is an element of focus needed.
And we're kind of gloriously blessed in the sense of our landscape, because much of our mythology is still, you might say, etched onto the landscape in the form of ring forts and
Yes.
megaliths and all of that kind of those
There's
things of a physical nature.
right across the field here, there's a ring fort, and it's called Tuatha, the son of Oisin. Oisin was the son of, sorry, the hill of Oisin. Oisin was the son of Fionn na Cúl. There's another hill over there called Tully Lug. That's the hill of Lulan Fada. And these things are all around us. All around us. And
just on a personal curiosity, what's your own favorite myth
within the Irish pantheon?
Yeah.
My favorite myth.
Or do you have one?
Well, they're all like beautiful in their own way, but I think I absolutely love the time by Cruiga, particularly the end of it, where Setanta becomes Cúchulainn and then has to kind of have a battle with himself in order to transcend the limitations of humanity. He actually in there's such beautiful prose written into that, like the chariots of Ulster tearing up the roots of the trees as they charge forward towards the army of Connacht. The chariots representing cutting the roots of the tree. It means we're in a new place now, folks. We have to think differently. So the old roots are not working right now. We have to. The beauty of the language of the people that were ancestors, the strapping of himself to the stone as he was dying with his own intestines, sort of like fusing himself symbolically with the ancient past, while the Morrigan comes to collect his soul to have him reincarnated. If you cannot be moved by the statue, the sculpture inside the GPO in Dublin, you basically have that's Ireland. That statue is Ireland. That's what we are. Even in our moment of defeat, the ancient gods, the Macha, the Morrigan, and the Bay, will leave our shoulders and carry us back again. We'll never die. And I think that's what I love most about the Toyin is the second part of it, where Cúchulainn dies as he's a boy, really, he's still a boy, but he leads the armies of Ulster. But also at the same time too, he's a story of resurrection. He's a story of, it's like in the Lord of the Rings where Gandalf says to, I think, Pippin, no, there's no such thing as that. Don't worry about it. You're okay. It doesn't end here. And I think that to me is the thing, because that shows you that we don't go to heaven, that the spirit of the Gael or the spirit of the Tuatha Dé Danann or the spirit of the whatever we are, the Celtic people, we're basically a soup now of Northern European tribes, and we share a common archetype. So that Morrigan that raven will fly off our shoulders and will return again in a different form. And that's why that statue inside the GPO is so powerful. In fact, if you live in Dublin and you want to start doing this right away, go see that statue. Go see it tomorrow when the post office opens, and you look at that, and you'll be reminded. You will, and then think about the way I just described it, and then you will realize that this story is far from over. The socialists and the globalists and the lefties have always pushed this idea that history is ended. Year zero, 5-year plans, new beginnings, this kind of the Great Reset nonsense, right? But if you live outside that, you know that history is a secular thing that continues on and can't be destroyed as long as you remember. And this is the beauty, and that statue is so powerful. And to be on the place where Patrick Pearse read the proclamation, it fuses so many things together that there's no disconnect between the old gods of Ireland and also the Viking and the Nordic gods who were there, and other European gods that I venerate. There's no disconnect from my daily life and them. There's no disconnect. It's not like, oh, today I'm going to be a pagan. No, today I am. Today, I am walking in the archetypal shadows. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants that came before me and kept these legends alive. And that's what spirituality is to me. The ability to harvest and then utilize and then bring from the subconscious mind these archetypes that can actually help you in the presence. And there's nothing that can defeat that in the material world. Nothing, regardless of what your race is.
One thing there, just on I think I saw a post of yours recently, and it kind of I felt aligned with it, if you like, is that you were talking about your own spiritual practice, and you said something along the lines, unless I'm wrong, correct me if I am, that satire and humor is a big part of your spiritual practice.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Well,
I would see that I'd be kind of
absolutely.
feel the same way.
Yeah, well, I came out of the Discordia scene in New York, and there was, and like chaos magic and all that kind of scene, being involved in that. It's still very interesting, still utilize it. The concept of derailing conscious processes by throwing them into the world of farce. This goes right back to the bards. This goes right back. Who was the only one who could insult the king and queen and get away with it? The bard, the jester. What's the last card that goes back into the deck? The Joker. The first and last card. This is a human trait that creates an ability, and it's not passive aggressive. It has a spiritual force to it. All you have to do is you can look at this. There's endless numbers of comics and comedy films and stuff that have deep spiritual stories to them, but they're ultimately rooted in farce. So, we have that like in spades in this country, and we've always had it. You go look at Flann O'Brien and Miles Nagopoline and the Third Policeman and all these bizarre. Spike Milligan would have came from that tradition, even though he was English. That's there. That's there, and it cannot. It's the reason why I'm still on YouTube is because I use code words for things. And also when I do these characters like Anto and Becco and Barry Drummore, it wrecks because what they do is they put an algorithm footprint on you, right? And this algorithm footprint watches you over a number of months and then realizes, oh, we got to ban him. I'm driving the AI mentally ill with all this stuff because one minute I'm talking about serious stuff, and then I'm doing like this guy in the Deep South going on about his 50th wife. And this is deliberately done because it's a creative thing for me. And I learned it during the Discordia Chaos Magic years that this concept of farce was a very good way of wrecking pathological forces that were constricting, that were tying you in. And this is why they've killed comedy in recent years. This is why there's no good sitcoms on TV. The only comics that are allowed to go into the mainstream are a bunch of politically correct, woke, dingbats. And the satire is like mythology. It's the truest truth.
Yeah, no, and it's just, and there'd be a side point there as you were talking. It got me thinking about, the creative. If you were a creative Irish, artist, writer, poet over the last 4 years, you would have thought that this was the richest vein of inspiration that you could have to produce stuff. And yet I was reading an article on, it was Roddy Doyle has a book out, and again he would have, if I went back 20 years and I made a prediction about who might call this pandemic era correctly in the form of a fictional book. If I go back to Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, or the creation of the Paula Spencer and the family, and I just found it hilarious that his book is set in the pandemic, yet Paula Spencer as a character would never in a million years, in my opinion, have got vaccinated. But we have to live this lie, not just in the real world, but also in fiction.
Yeah, well, Roddy Doyle is also, he probably would never admit it, but in some levels he's atoning for his problematic past. If you read The Snapper now, it was enough to be sent every woke operation after him. If you read the original copy of the commitments, the N-word is all over it. If they didn't use blacks, they used the N-word all over the book. And he knows that too. So he has to kind of make sure he got very quickly into the politically correct game with a star called Henry. And I knew, but even Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, was even the beginning of that. I actually found that book to be quite very average. Like The Woman Who Walked Indoors was another one. And so I think he's kind of atoning for the fact that it's just, isn't it funny that often the ones who are the most politically correct often have the stuff in the past that was the most hardcore. I mean, could you imagine the snapper? She has sex with a stranger. It's basically a rape, but it's handled in a humorous way in the book. And let's be honest, that's how life was back then. There were a lot of people in Ireland, a lot of people in Britain. We were less, I guess, sensitive to things like that. We're way more sensitive to it now that Sharon was basically raped by old, what's his name? Burch, I can't remember, Georgie Burch, whatever his name. And she was drunk. And in the film, it's shown in a kind of a funny way as well. A1 Sharon, when that's all he says to her after the sex is over and walks away. And she's so drunk, she just doesn't even know what happened. And that's like a shocking thing. And it is a shocking thing. It is a shocking thing, and how then it was handled very well, the legacy of how that damaged the family, and there's a beautiful resolution to the story where, Jimmy Sr. and all his friends decide to create a mythology around Sharon having a baby with a foreign sailor, a bit exotic. And so it's a beautiful scene at the end of that film where it shows what true friendship is. Despite all the slagging of one another, sure, Sharon's a good-looking girl. No way would she be ending up with him, with some foreign sailor, a bit exotic, like. And it's just it's such an emotionally beautiful scene, and that's how we used to solve things in the past. We would try to make resolutions that created new mythologies, but now it's all about victimhood. It's completely one-sided victimhood, and so this is I find it's a great tragedy that Roddy Doyle has never stood up and defended the things in the way he did, because how he approached them in the old days was righteous. The conclusions to many of those books is often quite beautiful. It's a beautiful sense of conclusion and a celebration of life and human decency at the end of the Barrytown trilogy in particular. But then he really lost it when he gone off tangent when he went to A Star Called Henry, and it became like Louis Armstrong's manager, and it was just totally not. It seemed totally contrived. He also did a modern remake of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the Sidney Poitier film set in Dublin. So it's like will the real Roddy Doyle please stand up kind of thing, But the satire he used back then was second to none in the first bunch of books. I can't hear you, Gerry. I can't hear you.
Absolutely. No, what got me thinking was it was a Roisin Ingle interview with him, but the backdrop to his current book, I forget the name of it, was that he was getting off the stage, having got his jab, and he was driving home, and the Paula Spencer character is one. I think she's the most one the character he identifies most with, but she's been set at his own age. And it seemed funny to me that on the drive home from that vaccination, I don't know, was it a set piece because he was well known or whatever, that he got the inspiration to have this book about Paul, this latest book on Paula Spencer and a relationship with her daughter during the pandemic. They were thrown together. And I was thinking how, in some sense, he was trying to make right that her character had to mirror his reality of what he had just done.
Yeah.
And that I thought that there was there was something not good in that, like in terms of to kind of force your creation to follow your kind of personal path.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, so I don't know.
No, I haven't read it. It's not out yet. I sidetracked there on that.
No. You said something important there I want to bring up. The use of mythology and challenges and stuff like that, and you mentioned the pandemic and all that stuff. All of us who didn't take the needlecraft, who didn't take the jab, right? That was, and from the beginning of the initial lockdown all the way through the whole bullshit that we had in this country and other countries, until they stopped it and ended it. We were that was just like Frodo and Sam going to Mount Doom to throw the ring into the fires. That's what that was, and we did it. We went through an arduous journey that invoked all kinds of powers in us, especially spiritual, to actually not do that. Now, I think, I mean, when you look back at the propaganda and how many of us said no, if you were to look at that 20 years ago, there would be so much more of us who said no, who would have said yes. There definitely is a consciousness awakening that's going on in Ireland, but in the West. But I think in Ireland more than most places. I don't know why. I'm not saying respect. I just don't know why it is here. But that they don't get a. This is an important thing to take from this. Is it's not as easy for them as it used to be. Like I even see the mainstream when I look at someone posts a story on social media. I look at the mainstream comments, and there's definitely a cynicism that was never there before. Like the pandemic failed for them in many levels. Like typical psychopathic thing, they pushed it too far. They rolled the dice one too many times, and they exposed themselves to what they are. So this is there's a lot to be hopeful for, because when I started this journey 10 years ago, I felt very alone in this world. No, I mean, I was woke about my life, but when I started to step into the kind of thing, and I see it's now people that I would have never believed or would have ever been on our side, whatever our side is, are here, shows to me we're making remarkable progress.
That brings me nicely to I suppose the last question is, are you excited about the future? Are like I have a sense, not maybe excitement's the wrong word, but I'm not negative about the times we're living in at all. Like there is a certain adventure to it.
Absolutely, that's the way to approach it. And I'm also positive. I also understand the secular nature of history and the cycles of things. And I also don't spend my time around misery guts, the woe is me types. I don't spend my time around them unless they, I know that we have people in our side who are like, they're sages who warn us, but they don't say this is the end, we're doomed. They're not ringing a bell going, the end is now. They're ringing a bell going, saying, wake up and we can end this shit sooner. That nature will naturally end. So we get a lot of shit coming at us out of the way. That's the answer. But I don't deal with the negative stuff. I don't deal with the political stuff because that's the biggest part of the negative stuff. And I don't get sucked into things, controversial opinion here. I'm not as enamored with the Burke thing as many on our side are. Sorry, I'm just not. And I think that we don't need a Jesus Christ. We need a warrior, a Jesus Christ to all follow. We need a warrior inside all of us instead. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. And
no, I think that's a situation that's evolved even in my head, because like I'm certainly an admirer of his inner strength and his but I am coming more and more to question whether there's a bigger game at play there behind him in terms of the school and in terms of what support might be there for him that we just don't know about.
I mean, to me, we don't really know what's going on in that whole situation other than the actual cover story, which is, I really don't want to talk about it because it gets
intense.
At the end of the day, folks, like I'm just going to say to you, I'm not in that one because I'm not saying it's dodgy or anything. I just think focusing on a central figure is not often a good idea when you need to focus on yourself. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Well, we'll end it on that, Thomas. Thanks a million for joining us. Thomas's Substack, by the way, is Sheridan.substack.com. And Thomas, you have a book out at the moment, or just out, is that correct?
Yeah, it's nothing to do with any of this stuff, but it has quite a lot of mythological elements into it, although it's mostly a Fortean and ontological sort of like encyclopedia that I co-wrote with my colleague Sarah Mondaini on the Hocus Focus on this Beyond Room 313 channel, where I'm very involved in that. So I mean, that's me. Put away the Sunday Times editorials and go find a circle or a beautiful and then see and let the ancestors speak to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks a million for your time, Thomas. We look forward to seeing you in Ballybritis in 2 weeks' time, and we'll just end it there.